We begin tonight with President Obama on the offense, taking on one of the most, if not the most, unpopular decisions he had to make as president.
Look, this was a hard decision. I didn't want government to get into the auto business. I've got enough to do. But I believed that if each of us were willing to work and sacrifice in the short term, workers, management, creditors, shareholders, retirees, communities, we could once again see the best cars in the world designed, engineered, forged, and built right here in Detroit, right here in the Midwest, right here in the United States of America.
That was President Obama today in Detroit, Michigan, hailing the success of the controversial auto industry bailout that he pushed through shortly after taking office in 2009. Mr. Obama traveled to a GM plant in Michigan today to celebrate the remarkable renaissance that the auto industry is enjoying right now, thanks in part to the boost it got from the federal government. It's worthwhile to take a trip into the time machine to remember just how unpopular the administration's decision to come to the rescue of the auto industry was. It was a lifetime ago in political terms, but the question of whether or not to bail out the auto industry came at a very tricky time for Barack Obama. It happened in late 2008 after he won the presidential election, but before he was sworn into office. So President-elect Obama was forced to lobby for the auto industry bailout, not from the Oval Office or the White House, but on programs like 60 Minutes.
For the auto industry to completely collapse would be a disaster in this kind of environment, not just for individual families, but the repercussions across the economy would be dire. So it's my belief that we need to provide assistance to the auto industry.
It's true that when you're the incoming president, you do have all sorts of political capital on your side. But keep in mind what Barack Obama was arguing for there. He was arguing for another government bailout in the wake of the extraordinarily unpopular financial industry bailout. It was a politically treacherous stand to take. At the time, 6 in 10 Americans were opposed to any bailout for the auto industry. Bailouts of any kind were viewed with the same sort of disdain. Arguing for an auto industry bailout was political suicide. People hated this thing, and congressional Republicans jumped right on the bandwagon. They attacked the auto bailout as both doomed to fail, but more insidiously, as an assault on the very heart of the American system of free enterprise.
It's just postponing the inevitable. This is a dead end. It's a road to nowhere, and it's a big burden on the American taxpayer.
When Americans cast their vote for Barack Obama, and they cast it for the Democratic Congress, that they also intend that this country should adopt social democracy, that lesser form of Marxism.
Can't call it a bailout because that might be too honest a statement to our citizens. So we call it a bridge loan. Actually, it's a bridge loan to nowhere. Hey, does anybody really think the federal government knows anything about the car business?
I think the average American would say, what? Isn't that putting the cart before the horse? Isn't that, to use a common phrase, just ass backwards?
How does anybody expect some car czar or some politician to be able to make the decisions that are right from a business standpoint for these car companies?
He believes in a collectivist society, and I think he has very strong socialist tendencies, and it really scares me.
Well, 18 months later, Obama has still yet to unveil his secret plan to collectivize the means of production economy-wide. And the very same American auto industry the Republicans had declared totaled and too expensive to repair is now cruising.
Today, for the first time since 2004, all 3 U.S. automakers are operating at a profit. First time in 6 years. Last year, many thought this industry would keep losing jobs, as it had for the better part of the past decade. Today, U.S. automakers have added 55,000 jobs since last June, the strongest job growth in more than 10 years in the auto industry.
In celebrating one of the genuine policy successes of this administration, the president also took an opportunity to draw a sharp political contrast between his administration's efforts to save the auto industry and the GOP's desire to see it sold for scraps.
I want you to remember, though, if some folks had their way, none of this would have been happening. Just want to point that out. Right? I mean, this plant and your jobs might not exist. There were leaders of the Just Say No crowd in Washington They were saying, oh, standing by the auto industry would guarantee failure. One of them called it the worst investment you could possibly make. They said we should just walk away and let those jobs go. I wish they were standing here today.
Remember, the Republicans cast the auto industry bailout as if it were the end of the American free market system, as if the Cultural Revolution was somehow right around the corner. And today, now that the auto bailout has become a success story, now that Marxism has failed to descend upon America, what's the response from Republicans? Crickets. Nothing. Not much of a peep at all.
They might just come around if they were standing here and admit that by standing by a great American industry and the good people who work for it, that we did the right thing. It's hard for them to say that. You know, they don't like admitting when I do the right thing. But they might have had to admit it.
The auto industry bailout became this sort of right-wing trope about socialism and the perils of government interference. But to the degree that it actually worked, it's a powerful refutation of those arguments and an endorsement of government intervention. Bailing out the automakers was a politically treacherous thing to do for President Obama. I mean, let's be honest, it's not exactly the first thing you'd want to do once you take office, but it was the necessary thing to do. It was the right thing to do. And in the end, whether Republicans want to admit it or not, it paid off. Joining us now is Democratic Governor of Michigan, Jennifer Granholm. Governor Granholm, thank you for joining us tonight.
Chris, thank you so much for having me on.
So I want to ask you what your sense of the state of the auto industry is, and whether this bet, this high stakes political bet, it looks like it's paying off right now, as the president argued today.
Well, it certainly is paying off through our eyes and through the eyes of the millions of Americans who now have jobs, who would not have had jobs if it were not for the president standing up firm to have a manufacturing industry in America. The president realizes that the auto industry is really the backbone of manufacturing. It affects the glass industry. It affects the rubber industry. It affects the electronics industry. It affects, almost every manufacturing industry touches the automobile. And if he had not stepped in to save this, then we would be a nation that manufactures very little. It would be so harmful to our energy security, because of course we want to wean ourselves from foreign oil, but if we don't have an auto industry to get there, then that would be dissipated, and then it would also jeopardize our national security, because as the president said today, during World War II, when we needed to make B-1 bombers and ground transportation, who did we turn to? That manufacturing industry. Those plants were converted to manufacture the means for our nation's defense. If we don't have manufacturing in this country, we're a weak nation. And the president understood that. He came in, he said, I'm going to do something that's unpopular but right for America and for these jobs. And I can tell you, in Michigan, we are grateful. And in auto communities across the country, people are grateful.
Even with the success of the bankruptcy process that's been undertaken for General Motors and Chrysler, your state, Michigan, still has one of the highest unemployment rates in the country. I think it's around 13.2%. What do you want to see from Washington to reduce that unemployment rate to help recovery in the state of Michigan?
One of the things that he has done, that the president has done, and that Washington must continue to do in this country, is to continue to invest in research and development and clean energy solutions, because states like mine can convert from old manufacturing to new manufacturing. We have advanced manufacturing in our DNA to make the products that will lead our nation to energy independence and be able to export those products. That's help from Washington. When I say help, I mean you have to invest in some of the upfront research and development in order to get those kind of solutions spread in America. And that's why, for example, the battery industry, the president today was at the plant that will manufacture General Motors' first electric vehicle, the Volt. That battery that is going to be running that electric vehicle is going to be made in Michigan. Before the president stepped forward with the Recovery Act, we didn't have batteries made in America that would power the electric vehicle. Now we do. In fact, Michigan will create 62,000 jobs because of 16 battery plants that have now come as a result of the federal government's commitment to this industry. So strategically investing in industries that we know we are going to need in the future, and research and development to make sure that we can level the playing field with other countries. And frankly, Chris, we've got to ensure that we enforce trade agreements and only enter into trade agreements that are fair, like other countries do.
Governor, when you watch the debate in Washington, and there's a lot of noise being made about balancing the budget, obviously, there was a long period of obstruction, particularly from the Republican Party, almost exclusively from the Republican Party, for extension of unemployment benefits. Do you get a sense of a disconnect between the sense that representatives in Washington have about the level of economic distress the country is going through and the actual level of economic distress the country is going through?
I feel like I watch these debates when they talk about the deficit being the most important